Hey, students, welcome to week 5 of Health Psychology. Instructor Anderson here. Thank you again for all of your posts, your assignments. It's been fun reading. And I'll tell you right now, I mean, there is a lot of reading to do on my part, obviously, a lot of reading on your part as well. So I appreciate your patience with this work as I navigate as well. We're going to go right into week 5, and I might have two PowerPoints to share. I have two instructional PowerPoints that I'm going to share for week 5. And we're going to get right into it. You know the learning objectives. You know what you're supposed to do. If you have any questions, you follow up with me as well. But week 5 is being ill in the experience of stress and pain. So, we talked about in unit 4, we described ways in which, hey, somebody is ill, somebody is facing some health difficulties. What is the way in which people gain that perspective, and how they've gained a perspective and way they are experiencing that. What if you're experiencing a cold, you know if we were to hypothetically have the same strain of a cold or some sort of virus, are you going to experience it differently than me? Right? If we have just the sniffles, we have a runny nose, um, how are you going to perceive that versus me? Right? And there's a lot of ways we are going to do that. And there's a reason why those illnesses, those viruses, which we have, diseases that we may suffer from, there are ways in terms of the experience is going to happen. We look at it at a scale, right? And so now when we are ill, we are going to have that following of stress. And maybe even before that, we have that stress that leads into understanding. Now, we know that there is a lot of information on stress. What is stress? There is good stress and there is bad stress. And there is a way that we can look at it, right? You are interviewing for a job, right? You are excited. You are absolutely over the moon about even the opportunity, maybe about interviewing for this job, and you are stressed. Okay, what does that mean? What are you feeling? And in that stress, right, you are excited because there is a way that your body is reacting to this wonderful opportunity in front of you. When that's happening, that's a good stress, because maybe then at that point you are motivated to prepare. Maybe um, you are going over the questions for the interview. Maybe you are um, you know, just saying, hey, if this works out, this is what is going to happen for myself, for my family. And right. And there could be some negative stress too in there as well when we think about it. But again, there is good stress and bad stress. And we're going to go over a couple of little things here when we think about stress. So when we look at a picture like this, we look at a natural disaster. We look at the effect of the stress, or what kind of stress can occur when such natural disaster happens. When we think about the external environment, right, of our stress, what are the ways in which this person could respond? You can look at the picture, you can see what's happening. She's probably searching for something of importance. The gentleman in the background is probably overly exhausted. We make these assumptions, right, of the picture. We can probably say a thousand or more words um, with this, but we think about stress as the response to a stressor, as stress or distress. It's the tension. We think about the tension that these two people are feeling. They've lost something of great value, right? And this could have a harmful effect on them for years to come. They could develop certain anxieties towards weather. They could have many different ways of how they react to future, maybe even non-related to this disaster situations in their future as well. Okay, so when we think about this type of events that happen, in the world, they can be intentional, they can be unintentional. Such events strike suddenly without warning, and people who survive them, as well as those who help with the aftermath, often see the experience as a life altering. Is exactly what it is. And you know that this is going to be life altering right here. Despite the power, right, of these types of events, um, we it's quite I'm just trying to think of the word. What's the word I'm looking for, my friends? Um, the to point A to point B, I guess you could say, over time, right? More of that chronic. I'm looking at the chronic. That's the word I'm looking for. Chronic. Um, we look at the chronic stress that can occur, right? Now we look at acute stress. Acute stress is those everyday, daily stressors. Maybe you don't like to drive, and maybe you drive in heavy traffic every day. Maybe you go and take the subway every day. I had a student a couple years ago that talked about the stress of going to work every day, and she felt that that uh, caused her to experience so much anxiety, social anxiety, to be specific, and she had to make some changes in her life. Now, again, that acute stress can lead into some, issues over time, but at the same time, like a catastrophic catastrophic event, um, those things can lead to chronic stress. We have life events, for example, major life events, right? Experiencing a death or a spouse or a parent and getting divorced, right? Being fired from your job, moving to a different country, all major sources of stress. Okay. And again, minor life events can be stressful too as well. Maybe you just moved to a new house, right? Positive events such as getting married, becoming a parent, starting a new job, right? That's adjustment, that's change. With that change is a transition. The change is the event, the transition is kind of those emotions that you feel with that, right? And so a little bit of an adjustment, or excuse me, a little bit of a difference, right, of those types of other events, but can still be stressful. And we think about stress, we might just kind of think of this blanket, like I'm stressed, but what kind of stress are you feeling, right? Um, we know that such as divorce does not lead into something right in a single day. Those are things that, for example, lead throughout time, right? There are a lot of things that happen, that maybe the outcome is this is what the outcome is, but what led to that. And in that can be those, right, those small little acute stressors, but can lead to that over time, excuse me. And then we have these daily hassles. We're kind of covering stress, right? What is stress? What does this lead to that as well? We have the daily hassles of everyday life, right? Living in poverty, fearing crime, arguing with one spouse or significant other, balancing your work and your family life, living in crowded and polluted conditions, fighting the long daily commute. I talked about that earlier as well. So those are those daily, maybe those acute stressors, right? And it can be from both those physical and psychosocial environments. Those psychosocial environments are those ways of, those social and emotional pieces that we experience. So when we think about those daily hassles in the psychosocial environment, I think it's important to review the psychosocial, because that is that biopsychosocial model in health psychology. So people's psychosocial environment can be fertile ground for creating daily hassle, right? What environments do we live in? What is our family life? Are we stressed? Do we have a toxic work environment? Do we have positive or negative relationships with our family? Those, or when we talk about those, that the fertile ground that can grow to that way of how we approach certain situations, how it then leads to our stressors and how we react, reaction. And we're going to be talking about that in another chapter about our personality and how that can lead to heart disease, right? Stress, there's a lot of literature on stress, so much literature on stress and what that can do and lead us to diseases, right? How that can lead to hypertension to stroke, to heart disease, right? Anxieties, depression. So I'm not going to go over so much about this, but there's the way that when we think about health psychology, we always have to go back to those basic aspects of psychology, right? We look at the biological aspects of psychology, and we look at, there we go, the way in which our body responds, the chemical makeup of our body, the neurons, and those are the way that our brain is communicating, right? We receive information, we transmit that information, and then we obviously respond to a certain way. And we have our central nervous system, which is our brain, then we have our spinal cord, right? And then we can have those sensory neurons, right, connected directly to the brain, but also through our spinal cord. And the way our body moves, we can have those motor neurons. So I'm not going to go so much into this. This is just a quick background. I think it's important for you to, review this from general psychology. Um, but there is a way in terms of how we keep our brain healthy, because in the long run, it's the way we respond. We receive that information, right? Just like when we think about the makeup, right, of the central nervous system, we look at the various regions of our body, right, and how it affects the heart rate. And when we heart rate, we think about the way we respond to stress, right? Have you been nervous? Have you felt butterflies, right? We know that you don't have actual blood butterflies in your stomach, but there is a way that you say, wait a minute, maybe I'm getting butterflies because I'm nervous, right? And that could be a good stress, that could be a bad stress, right? And the way that you may experience when you experience stress, that is going to interrupt your digestion system. And you can see exactly in terms of how it communicates, right? We can go right back to the way we receive information, right? The nerves, right? And when you think about, you ever heard of the expression, you're getting on my nerves? Well, these things are truly getting on your nerves. So we think about how we respond to a situation. Think of a situation, right? You have the way you perceive the information, the way our eyes look maybe of the situation, right? Maybe, and then we start breathing heavily, right? Right. And then our heart rate beats, right? It makes our stomach feel a certain way, right? And the way then our body is responding to that, we can go back to that basic way of excuse me, basic way of knowing how our system, peripheral nervous system, is responding in that situation. Exactly. It's how then our how are we going to respond? Do we get heartburn? Like when I'm stressed, for example, I'm going to get more heartburn, right? I'm going to get more heartburn. I drink coffee all the time. And if I'm in a stressful situation, that coffee is going to make me not feel the best. And then at that same time, it triggers other things as well. Now, I'm pretty good about then how to respond to that, right? And how to cope through that situation. So this is just a quick little way of going through the basic biology. So the physiology of stress response is it begins with the perception of some kind of stress or threat, whether it be an unfair accusation or insult, a job demand, or perhaps an opposing team rushing towards the goal, right? As an athlete, the perception results in the activation of the sympathetic division, right? The automatic nervous system. Then that is how the emotion, the stress, and that way of how to maybe even fight, flight, freeze. There is an actual aspect involved further in that fight, flight, freeze, or even float. There's a new one that we can do too as well. All right. So this is, again, a way that we can quickly review the biology of how it responds to our heart rate and our breathing. You can pause the video and read through that. You can pause the video. And I'm not going to go through this because in consideration of time, I want to go through a few other methods as well. So you can pause if you want. So we talk about the various views in the interpretation of stressful events. Think about this. In Ledras' view, the interpretation of stressful events is more important than the events themselves. I think that's the best way to um, summarize in terms of the way that we, well, appraise the appraisal system. Neither the environmental event nor the person's response defines stress. It's the perception being the critical factor. Let's read this example. A job promotion may represent an opportunity and a challenge for one person, but a significant source of stress for another person. Attending a soccer goal in the midst of the World Cup match might be a challenge for Solo, but a panicking inducing event for almost anyone else. It's all about the perception. I have a friend of mine that will call me. Will love her to death, but she will call me and just sometimes just cry, go into just these tears of agony. It seems like, and she'll tell me about how stressed she is and how upset she is, how nervous she is, and it could be about something as, "Hey, I got an opportunity to interview for this job, or I have an opportunity to speak in front of this group," which is maybe an opportunity for her to promote more about who she is and her views and all that good stuff, right? And I would look at it as an opportunity like, wow, this is great. You're being asked to do something fantastic, or you have a great opportunity to interview for a position you've always wanted, right? I would look at it as an opportunity. Yeah, I'd be nervous, but then it would motivate me to prepare and go into this mode of researching and just making sure I am at my best. That she will not eat. She will be in a way of just sick to her stomach. And I've talked to her about this, but it's a great example, right? Of the perception, right? Think about anything. Think about you in a sport that you love. Could you go in the middle of the field in a big crowd, in front of a big crowd, and make the game-winning drive or attempt to make a game-winning drive? Right now, again, for you and I, it might look different. For something like you, where I am quite comfortable speaking in front of crowds, I can do it. I've done it a lot, and it doesn't really make me too nervous. Right. Once I get into it, I'm good. But for somebody else, right, that may be that defining critical factor we've talked about. So the transactional model of stress is the effect that stress has on a person is based more on that person's feelings of threat, vulnerability, and the ability to cope than on the stressful event itself. Hiking, maybe in the desert, may be stressful. One may look at it as an opportunity that, hey, I'll never get this opportunity again. One may look at it as there are killer snakes everywhere. Okay. So, for example, losing a job may be extremely stressful for someone who has no money saved or who believes that finding another job will be difficult. But another opportunity may be, as someone says, you know what, here's the thing, one door closes, another will open. I can do this. Okay. So, when we think about the transactional model of stress, we appraise it, we look at it, right? First, it emphasizes Lazarus and Folkman's interactional or transactional, right? The transaction, we think about that back and forth. Holding that stress refers to a relationship between the person and the environment, right? When you make a transaction, I think about the connection of words. When you make a transaction, you are going to be like a transaction at the bank. I am communicating from me to the banker. I am communicating from me to the connection of the money to make a transaction, right? Now, again, that might be an apples to oranges type of example. Second, the definition emphasizes the key role of a person's appraisal of the psychological situation. I look at appraisal. When we think about appraisal, right, I think of the idea of a house, right? I think of the idea of a house. Let me just pause right there and let me stop the share. I'm going to share a different screen this time. And I'm going to, this was another PowerPoint I had, and I think this is, let's see here, transactional model of stress. I think of the house, right? We look at the appraisal of a house. We look at the property value, right? This is what we're looking at. People are looking at location. They're looking at market. What's the market at? The age of the house, the condition of the house, the improvements that are needed or have been done already, and the neighborhood. If you put a picture of a house right now, your appraisal right is going to be a lot different than mine. Of those different aspects, of those different, I guess, conditions, you could say, what is more important? Now, for me, if I'm looking at a house, I'm going to look at the neighborhood. This would be my most important piece. Now, for you, what are you appraising it at? What is that interaction? What is the way? Now, again, this is really not related. I'm just trying to use the word appraisal and try to connect it to the word of when we think about the transaction, the appraisal of stress, of stressful situations. So when we look at that, that is important to draw upon and understand how that transactional model goes. Third, the definition holds that stress arises when a person appraises a situation as threatening, challenging, or harmful. Now, you and I are going to look at challenging situation a lot differently, right? I look at it as an opportunity. If I were to say have an opportunity to move away, I may look at it as wow, it is going to be a challenge, but it's going to be an opportunity. I look at it first of all more as the half glass full, as others may not. So appraisal, when we think about primary appraisal, is not necessarily first in importance, but it is first in time. So when a person, think about this, when people first encounter an event, such as an offer or a job promotion, they appraise the offer in terms of its effect on their well-being. What is it going to do for me? Is it going to help me? Am I going to get something out of it? Is it going to make me feel in such a way of this, or this? This may view this may be irrelevant, benign, positive, or stressful, right? So somebody may look at it as, this is not important to me. This is not is no connection to me, right? No implications of my well-being, right? Think about a snowstorm. For me, it'd be a snowstorm in another state, right? It has nothing. It's irrelevant. Now, benign positive events are those that are appraised as having good implications. What is it going to do for me? Oh, yeah, this is okay. Oh, yeah, this is going to help me. A stressful event means that the event is appraised as being harmful, threatening, or challenging. Now, I always look at that word challenging. I think that is kind of not always a bad thing. I think of a challenge as an opportunity, right? And we again, even in itself, the word challenge is going to be appraised differently, right? Is going to be viewed differently from you and I. So, but Lazarus defined harm as damage that has already been done, such as illness or an injury, threat as the anticipation of harm. Now we have to go back to the definitions of what the theory and the person behind the theory is focused on, and the challenge is a person's confidence in overcoming difficult demands. So it's kind of exactly what I said, but I wanted to make sure you knew the definitions clarified by him. So think about that. When we talk about these in the book, you have to make sure that you understand where, and I should have probably covered that at first hand, but I am covering the actual appraisal piece right now. This is interesting. Research indicates that the perception of a threat or challenge makes a difference for performance. Perception of challenge leads to better performance than perception of threat. So, yeah, absolutely. When we think about challenge, we think the person's confidence. Then we can go back to the other chapters when we have the connection to self-efficacy. If you have high self-efficacy, are you going to approach that challenge with much more, I guess you could say, ease, or at least you're going to understand that challenge a lot more? I think so. Because when you have high self-efficacy, when you have low self-efficacy, that challenge might be more of a mountain versus a hill. So let me clarify. If you have high self-efficacy, that challenge could be connected to the person's confidence. They might have confidence, but maybe not a whole lot. And that challenge actually in itself might be more of a mountain versus if you were to have high self-efficacy. I think I got those things mixed set. Okay. Does that make sense? All right. So I get excited about this stuff. So if I kind of stumble over my words or say something the wrong way, again, high self-efficacy is your ability to say, yes, I got this. Low self-efficacy is like, maybe I got this. Right. And I think that's important to note in the perception. Second, right, when we think about secondary appraisal, right, after the initial appraisal of event, people form an impression of their ability to control. This is where they start thinking about that. This is where they might take their experiences. They might be able to say, can I cope through this? Do I have the energy? Do I have the ability to do that? So they asked 3 questions. The first is, what options are available to me? What is the likelihood that I can successfully apply the necessary strategies to reduce the stress? And the third is, will this procedure work? That is, will it alleviate my stress? Will I be able to get through this? Each of these secondary appraisals could influence, right, in the way that the stress is actually experienced. Okay. It goes again based on our past experiences, the way we've learned, the way we performed, our feelings. Um, and it all has to do on the situation, right? It all has to do with those minor life events, for example, major life events, right? Does stress cause illness? Yes, it does. We could just stop right there and says it does, right? And the way it affects our health status. And there has been so much research on this, and this is why health psychology is such a crucial part to understanding more about these types of situations. So there are multiple pathways. There are the psychological factors, right? There are the direct pathways, how it has an effect on high blood pressure, and then the indirect pathways, which is that diet and sleep, right? Have you ever had a chance to, have you ever been stressed out so much that it affects your sleep, that affects the way you eat, the way people cope through those stressful situations? That's exactly what it is. It's showing you right there. Stress happens in those various pathways, right? And so those psychological moderators, the things that can come in and say, hey, whoa, 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 you can go this way or that way. It's the coping. Do we have the strategies? As a school counselor, I help students finding those coping mechanisms. Okay. I've had students come into my office because of situation X, Y, and Z, crying. Okay. Let's see what we know about their coping mechanisms. And I would say 70% of the time they've had coping mechanisms that they've used. But I just need to help them dig a little bit deeper to get them uncovered a little bit more, right? That's social support, friendships, teachers, neighbors, family. Personality has a lot to do. Our values and the action towards controlling those situations. Are we going to put it into use? Approach and avoidance coping is the confronting. A lot of people will confront that. They'll say, we got to do something about it. And the avoidance is the minimizal of importance. And a lot of times what happens is they'll dig deeper. They will dig a hole for themselves right in those situations. Whether they have that problem focused coping, there's emotional focused coping, right? There are ways in terms of how people will find the way of coping or essentially avoiding the coping, but that in itself is coping when we minimize the importance. So like we talked about, emotional focused is more that attempt to manage emotions evoked by stressful events. Problem focus is let's take action. We're going to do something about this, right? I know when I get more stressed out or I'm more on edge, I guess you could say, is because it's a lack of maybe I'm not exercising as much. Okay. So I know what I need to do. If I don't walk every single day and I notice that, I will become more, I guess, heightened anxiety, right? And then I know that, wait a minute, I'm gonna pull up my coping mechanisms. I'm going to be more of a, I gotta confront this. And by confronting it, I'm going to have that problem focused. Okay. So for example, we these are studying for an upcoming exam. That's a problem focused coping. Somebody might say, I'm gonna write in a journal. Problem focused coping, developing a budget to save money. Maybe money is a stressful event. An emotion focused coping would be exercising, talking to a friend to solve a conflict, watching a comedy. Again, these are different methods of problem focused. So maybe we do a combination. Maybe some of you are more on that. And these are obviously there are some things like this where this can be a negative approach to it. And we know that there are obviously ways of that are not always good in those problem focused, right? Because you take action. I'm going to take action, but it's not always the best action. And we're going to focus on those, right? There's emotions, but sometimes it is too emotionally focused where you're going to let those emotions take over for you. And that is not always healthy. Social support, we need to make sure that we have people in our lives, people that we can call, text, right? That's important. I think in the world of technology, texting is important. So people are going to confront or not confront that, but people are going to be able to, I think it's more acceptable, right? As well. All right. We're going to go over this in another chapter, but there are various personalities. We'll go over just a little bit here as well in sake of time. There are the ways that we have our personality. There are type A, type B. I always like to say, in the classroom, I would say, what personality are you more like? And there's a lot of research to say about how, um, when you're more of a type A, right, you're going to be competitive, you're going to be impatient, hostile, and maybe vigorous in the way you communicate. So that can tend to lead to more of how you cope and maybe handle certain situations, which in the long run, there has been research around that towards high blood pressure and such like that. Okay. All right. Optimists. I believe that I'm an optimist. I think it's we go back to the half glass full, right? Um, you know, they experience less emotional distress, right? There's a lot of studies like that with that as well. They can say that, hey, you know what, I'm gonna, I maybe I'm sick and maybe I have this disease, but I'm gonna make the best of it and I'm going to live my life to the best of my ability and those types of things. So that in itself, if somebody were to just say that and the connection of how we speak in our language, that in itself can help with that response. Positive moods. This is actually interesting. You can stop this and freeze this and watch these or read these, excuse me. But I think it's interesting to note that, these are things that are just not made up, but I felt like important for you to connect to what we were learning. And the last part too as well is, which is the one of the final controls, I'm sorry, mediators, is the control. So attributions and control, stress to be controlled or not. What kind of things when we have a stressful event, right? Can we control it? Is it in our ability? Is it in our way to, well, is it the locus of control, high or low? Is this happening because these external factors that are something that I just cannot, right? Right? Literally control, or the more of the internal things that I can make happen based on my decisions, and this is why it's happening, right? Whether it be um, I didn't get the job, and do I become mad at the place that I interviewed that did not hire, or do I say, you know what, maybe I did not prepare enough. Maybe I'm not as knowledgeable in that subject as I thought. It's the same thing with maybe grading. If you get a bad grade, you could either blame me or you could blame yourself and say, you know what, maybe I did not write enough. Maybe I did not study hard enough. Self-efficacy and control, right? Self-efficacy again is the high or low confidence to say that I can carry out certain actions. I can say that I will be able to do this, right? And then the reality of control is the perceived, well, this is what could happen. This is what could happen by these actions. I will be able to do this, this, and this. And again, has much connection to that self-efficacy and the actual control. What happens with that? So, all right. That is the end of that information for this chapter. I appreciate your time. I'm going to put my video back on as well. I hope that you enjoyed this. If you have any questions, reach out. All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.